What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Eight Limbs Podcast. Today I have a very special guest, and me personally, I am super excited about. Welcome, Giancarlo Bondoni. Giancarlo is a Jiu-Jitsu black belt and now current ADCC world champion. He's training at a new wave Jiu-Jitsu in Austin, Texas, and I'm looking super forward to getting some insight from him and what winning the biggest event in the entire world of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was like, especially the training for it. Giancarlo, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So right off the bat, let's get right into it, man. How does it feel still currently to know that you're an ADCC champ?
I don't. It's not really something I actively think about, but definitely the feeling of winning a tournament is satisfying. You know, because you put a lot of time and effort into it, and you think about it a lot. And especially the lead up to ADCC was a very long one. Like the time frame from trials to the actual event was almost exactly 1 year. So it was definitely a big one, definitely a big tournament, but it's not something I actively think about or linger on. And so I kind of try to keep it in the back, in the rearview mirror, sort of.
That makes sense. And obviously with the team that you're with, right, there's a lot of accolades and accomplishments in the training room. So it's not as if you're like the gym's only golden egg that you're walking in every day and people are bowing down. You're like, dude, 1-1, I'm sure you have a lot more you want to accomplish. So that does make sense.
Yeah. And so like ADCC was like the pinnacle a year ago. Sorry, a year before ADCC, that was like the pinnacle. And now you have to think about like, what's after ADCC? What's next? Like, how can you? Because that's your new baseline. Like ADCC, it's a guarantee 2 years from now that I'm going to compete in it. And so, how can I raise the bar after that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that's amazing. But obviously, it's when I started doing jiu-jitsu in 2006, when you would go to YouTube and you would look up BJJ, submission grappling, jiu-jitsu, you didn't see much. There wasn't instructionals out at that time. There wasn't a whole lot. You'd have some jiu-jitsu documentaries, you'd have some Hicks and Gracie stuff, and you'd have a lot of ADCC matches. So what I started watching, most of what I watched was Marcelo Garcia and Eddie Bravo and all these guys fighting, Roger Gracie fighting ADCC. So these are like what I started watching, and it clearly is. It's the World Cup for what we do. You know, it's the biggest event. So it was so cool when I was watching here, especially just this last event, how theatrical it was. I mean, it was a UFC is what it felt like. Having Bruce Buffer introduce you guys and having you guys come down the ramp, you know, like, did you feel any kind of nerves and experience with that? Or are you just like, whatever, where's my match and let's do this?
Yeah, it was the best like sporting event that I've ever actually attended, period. Like not just combat sports, but just sporting event, period. Just the energy in there. And so I found myself competing the whole weekend, but when I wasn't competing, I was watching. I was like in the actual crowd and in the arena as opposed to being in the warm-up area more than I was actually in the locker. Just because I was like feeding off of that energy and I really just enjoy it. And something that I like to do is be close to the mats just to kind of acclimate to the environment. But because it was such an exciting event, there was so much theatrics and so much, I didn't want to miss out on any of that. Like I wanted to actually just enjoy that full experience. So there was definitely nerves and excitement and just this kind of whole like euphoria around the entire experience.
No, I can see that, man. I can see it being something where you're like, I want to experience every bit of this I can, right? I think if you just stayed backstage, headphones in, hoodie up the whole time, you might not have got a chance to really see this is where I'm fighting is down there on that mat, you know?
So it was 100%.
It was dope to see that. So as you're leading up to, right, when did you decide you're like, hey, I'm going to compete? Or were you a trials winner? How did that process go for you?
So I won the East Coast trials, was the first North American trials. So
that's and when you going into that, like, let's see what happens, or were you like, hey, like, no, I'm going to ADCC with my team, and I'm making this happen?
So it was kind of like I came from mostly a gi competitive background, and so at the time when I was deciding to do trials, I wasn't full-time training with New Wave, and so I was teaching in Boston at Bernardo Faria's academy. And so I decided to do trials. I had been competing more no-gi since moving to Boston. And so I had been doing more and more no-gi events while still training primarily in the gi and competing primarily in the gi. I was doing more no-gi events. And then I just decided to do the trials. So I had been training for a few months with the anticipation of doing trials. And ultimately, when I moved to Austin, I had about 3 weeks before the East Coast trials, which was the first North American trials. So I had a little bit of time to kind of train with them and work on some specific stuff. But I had already been anticipating doing the trials for a while. So that was my goal was trials, and then after trials, it was the World Championships.
Yeah, and then clearly you made it there, and it worked out really well for you. So
Yeah.
after you won the trials, and you're like, okay, now it's real. What was the training time from winning trials to ADCC day one? How long was that?
So I think trials, if I remember correctly, trials was in October. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was October. Um, and the actual event ADCC was like mid-September,
Got
so almost a year.
And so yeah, now what was that like? What was it like? Okay, like I'm taking a weekend, and then you're clear like now it's time to really go into camp and like get ready for the biggest
Yeah,
day of my life.
yeah. So I had, like I said, I just moved to Austin, so it was a new training environment, but I was in a position now where when I was teaching at Bernardo's, I was doing jiu-jitsu full time, but I was teaching classes to mostly recreational and hobbyist practitioners. There wasn't any other competitor in the gym, and I had a few students that competed here and there but it wasn't that wasn't their focus. They were
Sure.
trained, they were dedicated, they would compete whenever they felt like it, but it was still like a recreational hobby sport. And so now I got to shift to being, in my mind, before I had the mindset and the like discipline to train like a professional athlete, but now I was truly like an athlete where I could just go to the gym. I had a coach, I had teammates that were also professional athletes and that acted like pros and that trained like pros. And so we had this very good training system, and I could just go to the gym and be a student and learn and do my training. And I also teach here, but I teach at a separate school at a separate time. So when I'm going to teach, I'm just the teacher. And when I'm going to train, now I'm the athlete, I'm the student, and I can go in, I can just focus on me. So that was a good shift. And it was something that I hadn't just taken classes in a few years. I had always been teaching for the last couple of years prior to moving here. And so it was cool to go back to like taking classes and training. And I always felt like I always felt like I trained best when I was teaching, when I was taking classes and just training,
Right. Right.
as opposed to teaching classes. But interestingly, I started getting better results in competition when I started teaching. I don't know if that's because of the teaching itself that it helped me. Yeah.
I think it's because you start to break down the techniques so much more simplistically and you understand them deeper. Like I kind of experienced
Yeah.
that myself too. When I was teaching, I was teaching jiu-jitsu at the gym, and there's a lot I want to dive into on that subject with you. But to comment on that, I do think it's like when you begin to teach more, especially when teaching like blue and white and blue belts, purple belts, they're asking questions sometimes that you might have not thought about in a while. And then as you answer their question, you go, oh yeah, that is when you would
Yeah.
apply that. Like, almost deeper understanding of positions, right? And so then you can
Yeah.
start to look at things a different way. But the question I want to ask is, I was just talking to a black belt competitor from the team that I'm from, and I told him I had you on the show. He was going to tune in and watch it, excited. And he just opened his academy, right? So he's trained for a long time, competes in everything's gonna be at Pans next weekend. And he's talking about now he's teaching. So when he trains at the headquarter academy during the day, twice a day, and he teaches at his academy in the evenings. And he was explaining how much harder it is to do both, right? Without, like, when you're in the role of an instructor versus when you just do what your coach tells you and you can just be like a soldier. So like, what is the difference for you? And like, what do you think? You think one of the biggest reasons why you were able to have such success is because you could show up at New Wave and just be like, yo, tell me what to do. And I'm not going to talk back. I'm going to do it. Because was that very beneficial for you?
It was also like I get to drill more, so I get to like do more technique. And like I'm actually like the full training session I can actually partake in, as opposed to having to like teach a move. I do it a couple times and then I try to go in and fix everybody else's mistakes. I can actually
Yeah.
spend time doing a move and working on it and just really feeling it. And I get to drill more, which was good. I almost never drilled when I was teaching.
Yeah.
And I would just do rounds, and you're just going in there and you're just using your students as bodies to get a workout in. Whereas like now I could be a lot more specific and intentional with the way that I trained. And I still did train that way when I was teaching. because my old coach, prior to me moving and taking a teaching role, I've had a very successful competitive career, Lucas Lepri, as a teacher. Running a school and competing.
Right,
And
doing
so I
both.
kind of learned a lot from how he trained himself. But for me, I always felt like if I could just do a class, do a training session, and then teach at a separate time, because I do enjoy teaching, that would
Yeah.
be the ideal situation where I had like my training session and then I had like the teaching time.
This episode of the Eight Limbs Podcast gets brought to you by Nootopia. Nootopia is an amazing nootropic solution for any entrepreneurs or high producers out there that are looking for a solution besides the traditional Adderall or Alpha Brain. Nootopia is a fully customizable box with 12 different compounds. I have personally been taking this for years. I have my entire team taking this as well, and it is an absolute game changer. There's some days you want to be social. There's some days you want to lock in and get focused data entry work, and Nootopia has a solution for you on any day. Use code Salazar to save 10% off. So I think the point is that when you're in the gym and you're training, one thing that you might notice as well is like if you're the instructor of the class, you can roll, right? But are you going to roll and really go after the guys that you're there to teach and put the same amount of pressure versus if you are having a round with Nicholas or Gordon, you guys are scrapping, I'm sure. You guys are training going after like competitors would go. Versus if you're the guy who's training and you're trying to work with and help. Do you feel like that's a accurate statement?
Yeah, partially. And I would try to I would get hard rounds when I was teaching, because I would just train to exhaustion, or I would do like shark tanks and stuff like that. But even training here, a lot of our training isn't with the main competitors. It's a lot of with the kind of junior or the other training partners. So that most of the training is like working, like 75% of it is like working on stuff. And then the other 20 to 25% is kind of harder rounds with the main competitors. So it's partially that, but it's also because you can get a lot of good work in with people who are a little bit less experienced than you, a little smaller than you, or people that that if you ramped up the pace, you could be able to get the better of them.
Right.
You could do a lot of good experimental work or trial and error stuff that helps you improve. And I noticed that for me, on a technical level, those are the best rounds for me most of the year. And then when it comes down to getting closer and closer to competition, when you're increasing your training intensity, then getting harder rounds with the better guys get you more ready for competition.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to put it like that. And you're not always so to kind of burst the bubble. A lot of people think is that when you go to a gym of high level competitors, and I've experienced this too when I visit a lot of academies, it's not how you think where it's you walk into a regular like Monday morning training and the best of the best guys are having ADCC rounds with each other.
Yeah.
It's a lot more flow state, a lot more protecting from injuries and drilling and working on basics. It's not just like so. I think one of the biggest common misconceptions in jiu-jitsu is that a lot of people feel as if they have to have a team full of guys at their exact level or better than their level to do well in competition. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's not necessary, because you don't always want to be training with those guys. That's one thing that I learned. So as a color belt coming up, I was always trying to pursue the toughest rounds. And that was good. That was good coming up, because it gets you tough, it gets you used to being competitive, et cetera, et cetera. And it's good because you are competitive and you want to win. So you need to have some of that. But as and I learned this initially from from Lepri and training under him, was he said that every time that he would train in the gym and he would try to pick out the best guys when he was training in a room full of black belt competitors, the rounds were always you were always basically stuck in neutral positions where each guy's trying to hold and doesn't want to give the other guy an inch. And so not a lot happens in those rounds. And of course, you get two guys that are same size, physical, and they both compete and they both train a lot. Even if you are the best guy in the world, if you want to just not give them anything, you can find a way to make the round ugly. So it's like, everybody, you fight for 7 minutes, a 7-minute round, and maybe you get a sweep, and then the guy's just holding, or whatever the case is. And so he said that he started getting his greatest results in competition, and he had a big undefeated streak where he won the worlds like 5 years in a row without losing, when he opened his gym. and because he felt that he was able to improve upon his technique by training with like blues and purples and really
Yeah.
be able to actually do more moves and kind of like rep things out more in the gym. And then he would make himself he would do a lot of like shark tanks and also like a lot of physical conditioning and things like that to get himself prepared for be in competition shape. But it was the fact that he was able to actually train more fluidly, that allowed him to that he feels like allowed him to get those results. And I agree, because you're not training with somebody who's just interested in not losing. You don't
I
want
agree.
to. Yeah.
I've experienced that a lot through training. It makes total sense how you put it. That's why sometimes if you take someone who's not conditioned to like a Pan Am's tournament and you have them watch Gi Jiu-Jitsu, they watch two black belts for 10 minutes do almost nothing. And it's because they're neither one wants to give an inch and they're afraid to take a risk. The guy's afraid to open the guard to get the sweep. So it equals nothing really happening, no risk being taken. Where like if you think some of the best roles I've ever had in competition or sorry, in the academy, I don't like a purple belt when I was a black belt, because you're like, you don't give a shit. You're having fun, you're trying shit. And then it's like a playful, fun, competitive match. And there's tons of movement and you're dead exhausted because you've done jiu-jitsu cardio through that role. Versus, you're right, if it's a black belt, it's like one guy's on top, one guy's on bottom, and it's usually like an 8-minute round, and that was it. Maybe there's a straight foot went forward, that's it. So that totally makes sense, and I agree. Our coach would always tell us this, but I kind of want to look for how much truth there was. Where our coach won Nogi Worlds and he won Pans. He also was running a gym and has a large gym now in Florida with over 500 students. So he's done the business side very well. But during the time, he was like, hey, I'm not just the business guy. I'm still going to compete. So he competed, won the Pans, won Nogi Worlds, and both those times he had no black belts to train with. We weren't black belts yet, our up-and-coming guys. And it was like, man, I just trained with you guys, my purple belts, my brown belts. I just did the best I could, and it still worked out for him. So he always said, you don't need to move out to go to Atos to win a championship, like some of the guys started to think of, like during that Keenan Cornelius era. I forget what year that was. That's right. When Lloyd Irvin split up and people went out there, he was like, guys, you don't need to do that. Wherever you're at, you can get training. And I think there's some truth to it. Obviously instruction matters, but I wanted people to hear that, because obviously your story is so interesting because of that, because you came up with a competitive gi background and then you go and have such a dominant performance at ADCC. And it's like, hey man, you can do it. Anybody can do that. Right. That's why this story is such a huge story, because it's like, look what this dude did. When I love how they put that how many times you watch a documentary, first of all? Yours.
I've only watched it once to complete like the whole thing. I've seen a bunch of clips and stuff on Instagram, but yeah, I've only watched it the one time.
It was so good,
like the day
man.
it came out.
I've already watched it twice because I had to show another buddy, but I was sick. And I just love
they did a great job.
Put it together, killed it. But it's like it's done in a way where it does the perfect amount to spotlight your accomplishments, but it also is meant as an inspirational piece to the future generations of competitors. Like, hey guys, like when you decide to flip a switch and commit to something, there's nothing that you can't do. And I love that background narrative to it, So it's like when you get out there, I know obviously if you guys haven't watched a documentary, it's called Becoming Dangerous. It's Flow Grappling put it out. I would highly suggest you guys check this out. But you met John Danaher from him flying up to Boston, or maybe taking the train up to Boston to do the positions at the BJ Maddox. You guys struck up a friendship, how he put it, and you started coming down to the Blue Basement, right? And so what was it like for you there? Because my experience at the Blue Basement was very different, because I wasn't there as a competitor. I was there filming, but I did get a chance to take some classes and roll while I was there. So I was definitely treated a little nicer, because they were like, hey, this is the guy that's filming us. So everyone was like trying to fuck me up, like how they probably would have. But what was that like for you when you started going on the Blue Basement and you first went down those stairs and for those training sessions? Like, walk me through that.
I mean, everybody, obviously I knew John and Gordon already. So, I mean, everybody was super nice. It was just a good training session, and there was just a lot of people to train with. So there's like 100 people on the mat at least, so that's a packed training room. So yeah, it was just good training. I mean, everybody was nice. I didn't have like I didn't feel as though like, I was like a target. Like I didn't feel that at all. It was just really good instruction, good rounds, same kind of style that we do here now, obviously, because John keeps the same kind of, runs the same kind of ship. It was really good. Going there a lot too during during COVID, because there wasn't a lot of training. Like even my in my gym, there was a lot less students. Like when we reopened, we had like 50% of the students, or even less maybe,
Yeah.
that actually came back initially. So I was going there a lot too, to get more training during that time. And so until eventually, the move happened.
Yeah, and so that was my first take too. When I first went there, and I've seen it on video, but when I walked down those steps, I was blown away by the amount of people in that room, and I thought it
Yeah.
was so interesting because like there's no warm up. He just like
Yeah.
walks in and starts teaching. Everyone's kind of doing stuff. People were active, stretching, doing their yoga, doing their jogging, doing their warm up. Everyone did their own thing, which I actually really like that a lot. Just like, hey, get your body
Yeah.
warm. You have your own unique needs. He walked in, showed a position with a very monotone delivery, and everyone just began to drill like jiu-jitsu nerds across the whole mat. And
Yeah.
the reason I was saying that the targeted thing, when we started training, we were there to film Nicky Rod, which makes sense because he was showing out for the cameras, right? But he had a round with David Branch. Remember David Branch?
I know of him. I've never actually met with him, but
He,
I
he,
do
was,
know
he
him.
was fighting in the UFC at the time, and I'd just seen him with the
Hmm.
fight. So I knew him as a UFC fighter, and Nick was training with him. And man, I mean, with the first round of the day, we're filming, and it was the most aggressive scrap with the slam. Nick on his back and just destroying his face up against the wall while standing on his back. And I was like, I looked at that. I had my production assistant, and I was like, dude, this is going to be a week up here. Like, this is what this is
Yeah.
like down here. No wonder these guys are such monsters, you know?
Yeah.
And what I thought was so interesting is that the positional starts, right? Every class, I guess that's what you guys do. We would do that leading up to events, but it makes total sense. Side control, is it side control, mount, and back?
We do a variety of different positions: mount, turtle, back, arm bar, close guard, a bunch of different positions.
But walk us through what that is. So for people that are listening.
Yeah. So the idea behind it is that you start a good position. Let's say it's mount, for example, and you play between top and bottom mount. So the top person is looking to get submissions and work from mount and just progress towards a submission from there. And the bottom person is looking to get out. They're looking to get back to guard or reverse you or whatever. So bottom person is looking for escapes. Offensive person is looking for submissions. And that way, the idea behind it is, the whole reasoning for it is that you get to spend more time in those positions than you would if you just started both
Like we said,
standing or both on your
like,
knees, or how normally people stand. Yeah, because the time that it actually takes to get to the mount, if you even get there, and then you have, unless you're going with somebody you can easily mount them, and then you get to spend more time there. But the sole focus of the role is based around offense and defense in that position, so you get to spend more time accumulatively across the year in one position, as opposed to just in a neutral position. And so that way, when you actually get to that position in a tournament, you know what to do. And oftentimes you see guys in tournaments that are really high level, they train a lot in neutral positions, but they don't train as much in winning positions, and so they don't have as much of a skill set there as they do in guard passing, for example, or guard play.
right. And they freak out if they get mounted, right? Because they maybe didn't spend a whole lot of time in camp. That's what I think is one of the biggest benefits, is like when John was explaining that, he's like, think about how many athletes that don't give an inch during training. So you got a guy, and he's like the best guy in the gym, and no one can pass his guard. And if he's not choosing to let people pass his guard, then he's going to develop a really poor mount escape after a while, because no one's mounting him anymore. No one's passing him anymore. And so when it's a black belt, his size, his weight, he's like, shit, it's been a while since I've been down here. And so I love the idea of that. Like the idea of you can escape a position knowing if someone mounts you, you're like, bro, I'm going to get out and I'm going to attack you again. And you're not stressed about it, right? Is that kind of the gist?
Yeah. Yeah, you develop a confidence in your defense. Yeah, so and that's the other half, is you're playing bottom too. You're not just playing top, so you get to work on your defense too.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother side to it, man. That's what you see. Like I remember he explained it in one of the videos that he put out, was like, it's just, if an athlete feels that they can escape a position, they're going to be way more willing to attack more often.
Yeah,
because like, hey, if I shoot this triangle, I'm not, and he passes me because I shot a triangle, I'm not that worried about it. I'm going to hip out, I'm going to get back, and we're going to show another triangle, instead of like how you were talking about earlier, these IBJJF styles where the guy's afraid to go for a submission because like, well, what if I get my guard passed? So he's like, ignoring the entire point of what jiu-jitsu is for, because he's afraid that something bad might happen, right? Which kind of kills the whole purpose,
Yeah, for sure. And so that's the biggest benefit, I think, of positional sparring, and that's where you see the most rapid kind of progress in your skill set, is just actually you drill the move. Obviously, you drill a variety of different moves from positions, so you know what the moves are, you understand, how they work, et cetera, et cetera. But then now it's time to actually do it live, and so you could drill mounted arm bars, and then if you're starting standing, how many times am I going to get to actually attempt that arm bar?
So
And so
true.
that's why you get to actually spend time and like try to set it up more and more, and then eventually you refine that technique, and it becomes a skill that you can use when you need it.
Yeah, I love that. And like I think a lot of people are gonna start to emulate that and mimic that scroll white. I think that one thing that John has done in the last probably like to say 8 years has like influenced jiu-jitsu academies across the nation with the way he teaches. Someone coming in to join you?
No, I was just saying hi through the window.
Okay. So I think it's
Yeah,
like people are starting to emulate that, right? Like you see now, it's like when before the ADCC where he broke down the double trouble with Gordon and Cyborg, most people were not entering those positions. And it's like
yeah,
I've traveled a lot. I've visited a lot of academies. A lot of people are doing those positions now, all
yeah,
everywhere. Because it's like you can't ignore it. So it's
yeah,
so cool to see them getting the spotlight, and he's like single handedly like almost changed the course of jiu-jitsu because of that.
yeah,
So
yeah, for sure.
what I
Yeah, and
want to
that
get
was
to
that was
is
entirely developed there too, which is that's why it was so like new, was because that was basically all John's stuff. Like that, it's all everybody does it now, but it's all kind of stemmed from there. So it was like
yeah.
really, really new in the last like decade.
Yeah, no, for real. I mean, it's incredible to see. And it's so cool to think when I got back from that trip, I remember thinking to myself, it's like, what a badass Henzo Gracie is to just provide that facility to allow that to happen there. Where at the time when there's so many like Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belts that were the old school style, they're like, we're Ghee school and we're this and the footlocks and hooks or sambo. I heard it all. And you get someone that came, whether it was because he was present or not, where he was like, hey, you guys do whatever. If you make some tap, I'm happy. And it's like because of that
Yeah.
freedom, because it wasn't like John opened his own gym, right? Because of that freedom, it facilitated this
Right.
incredible culture. So it's like it's so cool that
Hmm.
he created that there, and like there's not many places
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
are
For sure.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when
I
you got
agree. I
there
agree.
and you started training there, New Wave, which I think you were training the Blue Ocean, but you got to New Wave, and that was when the camp really started for you. What do you think is, and I mean, I know I've seen documentary, but I want people to hear your take on it. What do you think is the biggest reason for the big improvement you've made in your competitive style? You taking gold, like what was it? What changed within you?
Um, I mean, honestly, it's a variety of different things, but I definitely have to give a lot of credit to John and his training style and his teaching, which allowed me to just improve at a much more rapid rate than I would have on my own. Obviously, it's an individual sport. You got to compete for yourself. You got to think for yourself, and you have to have the discipline to come. Nobody's pulling you out of bed to go train.
Right.
So
And you
all
were
those
already a black belt,
things,
right?
are yeah. I was a black belt already.
Yeah, so you mean you had a coach
Yeah,
that gave you incredibly solid games. So you had a game, you had the knowledge, you had the black belt. So it wasn't like, just to clarify the audience, it wasn't like John Donaher was your coach, but it was like a different style, and you already came in with
yeah,
like just a very solid positional game, is how you referred to the documentary.
yeah, yeah. I knew jujitsu, and I did jujitsu for years. It wasn't so much as that. It was, Nogi being the focus, and also I had not a lot of familiarity with leg locks up until then. And so it really wasn't until I didn't even really start working on them until I started kind of preparing for trials. And then as I was, training with those guys from time to time, I would kind of pick up little things here and there, mainly on how to defend. And I would just kind of try to practice what I was learning um, when I was training in John's classes, when I would go, intermittently down there to train, or when he would come up and we would just discuss
Right.
technique and things like that. And so I was kind of doing that stuff on my own when I was uh, getting ready for trials, just as a preparation. But it really wasn't until I got here that I felt like I could, okay, now I could do this every single day. Like I had started doing positional sparring and doing all that stuff prior to, because I realized, okay, that's how he trained. And I had even asked him, I was like, okay, what's the one of the best what's the best way that I can train being here on my own, not having good training partners? And he gave me a bunch of tips on that. John
Huge.
did.
And so you always
Yeah.
take something home with you, right? Like you're saying, you always
Yeah.
put something. I remember when I was there, we were drilling. It was leg locks when I was there. So we were drilling inside heel hook, and I was partnered with Jake Shields, which was so cool because I grabbed him as a partner and we're drilling. And I was like, man, I've watched this guy for years, and now this is my drilling partner in academy. And like I wasn't even thinking of it like it was Jake Shields while we're drilling. But he showed me this like small little way to slip the heel and escape the heel that I just legit had never seen before. And I remember thinking, I was like, wow, my mind's blown off of that. He's like, I'll just do this. And I'm like, how many more of those are there here? You know, I was like, how many? And I'm sure you're going to tell me there's a lot more like that, right?
Yeah. Well, the difference is that now I had that, like, okay, he would give me, I would get some information. I would get, a tip or whatever the case is. I would go back and then I would apply that for a couple of weeks or a month or whatever the time frame was. But now I can have that every single day. And so I have that every day, twice a day. I'm always learning, asking questions. And so while, at the end of the day, you have to do the work by yourself, just having that resource, and having somebody who's so willingly and just always there, like he's literally always there, every single class, no matter who shows up. And so like having that resource is huge. Like that was to me one of the biggest turning points. And a lot of athletes are going to tell you across any sport that many athletes have a specific coach that really was like that turning point for them, that really helped push them to that next level. And so for me, it was in this part of my career, it was John.
Huge.
So big time.
I can see his teaching style just being a lot like, obviously I've studied a lot of it through the instructionals and then the 1 week that I spent there. That's about my extent of it. But I've watched hours and hours of his instructionals enough to realize, man, like the intricacy to detail is very unique to anyone. I've been to all the seminars. I've been to Marcelo Garcia, some of the bigger ones, Andre Galvao. I've never seen techniques broken down like that at that deep level. So I can imagine you're there for a year, you're training there every day, and you guys do legit train every day, or is it like 5 days a week?
Yeah, no, there's 7 days a week. We run classes.
That's incredible. So how does that work for you with recovery wise? Like, what's the schedule like? You trained this morning already?
Yeah, I trained this morning. We're doing Ghee now because Marigali and Helena are competing at hands.
He'll be here.
Yeah, exactly. So they're going there this weekend to compete. So we're doing Ghee sessions in the morning and Nogi sessions in the evening, but normally it's always Nogi. The morning session is usually a little bit of a shorter session. So it's, it's shorter than the afternoon session. So the afternoon session is like the main session. And then the morning session, is a little bit smaller group of people and a little bit of a shorter session. So I treat that kind of like as a little bit of a lighter session. A lot of times I'll do my lifting between those because it's not so hard that I can kind of go lift right after. But it's still a good session. It's just a little bit shorter and it's more focused on ground stuff, like more jiu-jitsu specific, like classic jiu-jitsu techniques. And then in the afternoon when we have our main session, it's a little bit more it's a longer session. It's a little bit more intense. We do more standing rounds, more wrestling and stuff like that. And so in terms of actual recovery, I don't necessarily I'll take sessions off depending on where I am in my kind of competition calendar. So if I'm like in camp, I don't take sessions off. But if I'm out of camp, if I have to travel for a seminar or whatever and I miss a session, it's fine because there's always going to be training. So I'm always going to be able to just stay consistent. Right. So if I lose a day, it's fine because over the course of the year, the overall volume adds up. And so that's kind of like where the training every day is. That's kind of like the philosophy of training every day is you win on volume as opposed to intensity, and you increase intensity when you need to. And so for most of the year, I tend to do a lot of my training. I do a lot of it for technical development. And so I try not to go. I mean, I still do hard rounds. Like there's still a workout. I'm still going to be tired and sore, but I'm not going to be as tired and sore and as beat up as I would be 6 weeks out from a tournament or 4 weeks out from a tournament when I'm going full intensity, when I'm doing my lifting and I'm doing 3 sessions a day and I can't miss a single session. So if I feel like I'm more exhausted, I'll just take the session a little bit lighter. Like I'm gonna maybe go with a little bit lighter guys. I'm gonna maybe practice defense more than I'm going to try to go hard and just win rounds.
There's probably
And there's
difference
still a
between
you're
like
still the
training
yeah.
light, right, and getting injured. Like being sore and being tired, that's where some people I think steer wrong. They can't differentiate
Yeah.
between, hey, I'm going to train enough. And I think that's just self-awareness and having a good coach in the room where it's like, hey, sore and tired are one thing, but like causing all this micro damage to your body that's going to have inflammation and keep you out of training now is very different. So
Yeah.
like, do you guys ever have this type of like, is it just on you to know your own
It's kind
body?
of it's kind of on you, and everybody's a little different, and that's one thing that I think is important to kind of identify. Like me personally, I like to be a little bit like I like to be right on that edge of like feeling overtrained. But some people feel like they perform better like when they train less, so
Have more
less
juice in the
volume. So I
tank,
know
more pressure
people
in my body.
that they train once a day and that's like perfect for them. That's like that's what they need. And like for me, like I can't really if I'm especially if I'm preparing for a tournament, if I'm just kind of on just like an average week, I'm like between tournaments, I don't know when I'm going to compete again. If I do a session a day, it's not that big of a deal. At least I'm training, at least I'm still keeping my body active and still doing stuff. But for me, I like to feel like in the session, like, okay, I'm a little bit tired, and I like to feel that for a couple days before I really feel that I need to taper back.
Mm.
Especially when I'm in camp. I know that there's going to be a couple weeks towards the peak of my camp that I'm going to feel really, really tired. And that's when I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm starting to peak. Let me push a little bit more before I start to taper down. So you got to kind of just know your body and like feel it. And if you're injured, like if you have an injury, like okay, I hurt my wrist, hurt my elbow, whatever, my shoulder, that's different. But if you're just feeling tired, um, you know, I think most of the time we can still train a little bit more than or actually a lot more than we actually believe we are tired. Your body's always going to try to protect itself and try to get you to rest, and so it's sending those signals and telling you to do so, which is a good thing. You want to listen to that, but I think there's something to pushing towards that like walking that fine line of like overtraining. Like I like to be a little bit on that line. It just makes me feel like okay, I'm doing I'm doing my work, like I'm doing my due diligence, I'm doing what I need to do.
Right. Yeah. You
So
feel
even
good about the work.
psychologically, yeah, exactly.
But you're talking about like how often you're probably gonna tell me every day. How often does it happen when you're like training's done, let's say the end of the night, and you get up and you're walking to your vehicle after training and you're just like lightheaded and you feel like you're floating and you feel dehydrated. Is that the state
Yeah.
you like to be in? You're like, this is where I live right here.
Oh no, no, definitely not like that. But I definitely feel like I've gotten like I get to the point where like by the time like there's a certain time of the day that I just feel like okay now like I'm exhausted. Like it's always like right around like 9 p.m. where I feel like this is like the day has ended. Like, and if I don't feel that at that time, I don't feel like I've done
Yeah. You're
enough
like, shit,
training in the
I
day.
gotta, right, right. That makes total
Yeah.
sense. And I
So
get
when
it.
yeah.
Good. No, go ahead.
When I'm on my routine, like when like I'm in a training camp routine, it's like clockwork. Like getting out of bed and then the time that my body is tired, it's like the same every single time. When I'm out of routine, like for example, I was traveling this weekend for a seminar. So you're traveling, a little bit of time change, you're sleeping and waking up at different times. Like I'm waking up at the airport, then I spend the whole day, seminar, eating, doing whatever. You're going to bed late, and so it kind of changes a little. And so when I get back here, like getting up in the morning, like you want to sleep in, and then when it's time to go to bed, you can't go to sleep. And so that's why I like staying on that kind of clock routine. It feels
Totally.
tiring, but I do notice like a big difference in like the actual progress. Like I feel like I'm actually getting better.
Yeah. No, I love that, man. I think people are going to really want to know a lot about your routines, your schedules, your training and stuff. I mean, people obviously, you're a big name at this point now. The amount of DMs I got on that Instagram story just shows me that, and people are like, holy shit, can't wait to see this. Like they want to know like, what this dude doing? So the training is huge. I remember we were watching Firas Zahabi on Rogan's podcast, and I know he was John Donaher's student, and he was explaining that. He's like, we're training 60, 70% all year, and we ramp up when we come to an event. He's like, I'd rather have a guy with way more volume. He made this beautiful analogy about two twin brothers, and one guy trains every day, one guy trains hard, black belt rounds 3 days a week. He's like, you give me those guys for a year, the guy who trains every day is going to fuck him up. He's like, he's experienced intensity periodically, but he's got way more reps with entering the legs, with taking the back. So I think that's good to know. And like when Rogan was asking Gordon about how much he trains, and he says every day, and Rogan's like, no, but for real, how much? He's like, every day. He's like, we're in there, man. He's like, we're in there every day. I think people are hearing that, and they're kind of like, is that the recipe? Because most academies do not do that. Most guys take weekend off, or they're taking some days off during the gym. But I definitely think there's a difference in training smart, where you're training flow state, training technically, versus going in there and getting, like, when we would go in for competition training and it was Ghee training and it's Florida heat, and we've got, let's say you have 10 rounds and 6 or 7 are black belts, you're fucking wrecked. I was. I wouldn't be able to come back and train Monday morning after that. I would need like ice myself down and relax, rest my body and stretch and do all the things. But I think that's got to be a difference. And do you notice a difference now that you've been putting the Ghee back on? Because I trained in Ghee for most of my time. And then it was actually that trip, funny enough, to New York, where I started to see, I got familiar with so many heel hooks that I was like, I was already a black belt. I was like, well, I'm just going to start training in the Nogi from now on, because I've got to figure this. Like, it was an eye opener for me, Giancarlo, because I was like, I'm a black belt and I feel hard to submit in my academy. But in this academy, I'm getting tapped by everybody with legs. And it made me, it fucked with my confidence. It fucked with my head a little bit. And I left and I was like, I have to fix this. I have to figure this shit out. So I immediately got John's DVD, entered his leg attack system. And I was obsessively studying that shit. And so I was even annoyingly going after the same positions in the Ghee during training, because I'm like, whatever, it's my only time to train. But I spent the last 3 years training no Ghee is the point I'm making. So even after this year hiatus, now that I'm training in the Ghee more, I'm noticing fingers are way more fucked and my knees are way more fucked. You notice that there's different types of body damage in training Ghee versus no Ghee? Like, what do you feel?
No, 100%. I was actually just talking about this today. So I used to train every single day in the Ghee, and I never taped my fingers. Like, very rarely. I only used to tape my thumbs because I broke both my thumbs. So they would dislocate a lot, and I would have to tape them. But I never taped my fingers, like, from playing guard my whole life. And now all of a sudden I started training again, and like my fingers started hurting, so I had to start taping them. And at the end of the session, even though we're doing like, even if I would do like a lighter session, I would just feel my forearms were like rock hard, because when we're doing no Ghee, you're gripping with your wrists, you're gripping a lot like this. You're gripping like this. But when you're gripping with the Ghee, you're using your fingers, so you're squeezing, it's just using different muscles. And so just not doing that for a year or more,
the muscle got fatigued.
The muscles, exactly. It just wasn't used to it. So like if I had been doing Ghee twice a week, even lightly, I probably wouldn't be feeling that, just because I had that, I was able to maintain a little bit of that. And there's I recently heard, I can't remember who it was, but he's like a pretty well-known like bodybuilding, kind of powerlifting. He's got a big YouTube channel, but they were talking about like maintenance and volume, and kind of like what we were just talking about. And he was saying how, if you've been lifting, for 25, 30 years, the amount of training that you've done up until this point, you don't need that much intensity to maintain the gains that you have. You don't need that much intensity to maintain the lifts that you can put up. So you don't really have to go hard in the gym, from a powerlifting or a bodybuilding perspective, or both, as much as you did in the beginning. And John one time made an analogy to me about maintaining skills, and how when you're starting early on, you're going a lot harder, things are a lot more difficult, you're more tired, your body's wrecked, your training sessions are a lot harder, et cetera, et cetera. But the better you get, it's like spinning a tire. When you start spinning the tire, you need to use your whole arm and your whole back to go in and start spinning it. But once it gets momentum, you can just flick it. and it keeps going fast. And so it's just a matter of maintaining. But if you completely stop, then you got to start all over again.
That's me
And so
right now, man.
that's what I felt right there, is that like, okay, it's better to, if I completely stop. So just the thing with my forearms, like just from not having the grips, my fingers, my forearms, I just feel that you're just using different muscles that you haven't used in such a long time. And so it's kind of the same,
Hmm.
it's kind of a similar,
Oh,
concept.
totally. And have you noticed too? To take it one step further, like passing is so dramatically different, and it's like you know, again, feeling the kind of grips that someone can get on your pants versus someone trying to pass you, Gi. It's a lot harder to defend the pass in Gi. At least for me, it
Yeah.
is. I'm like
Yeah.
they're controlling me in a way where I'm like, man, you would not have this. I could just pummel myself right out of this, and then I feel
Yeah.
like that's where a lot of that micro damage comes from because someone can grab your leg and just force your knee in a torque position with a grip. Where
Yeah.
if there was no gi, you can just slip that and pummel back out. So have you felt that as well? Like I think people take a lot more knee damage training in gi their whole career than if they train no gi.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a combination of things. I think that what you find is that, like, for neutral positions, the actual strategies and like the little gripping and technical nuances, you find a lot of differences there. Like the type of guards that you can play in gi
Yeah.
versus no gi are different. Like you're
Yeah.
not going to
Oh, yeah.
play certain things just because of what you can grip. Like you can actually grip the jacket. And I think that, getting to advantageous positions, like guard passing, for example, like getting to angles on people is a little bit harder in the gi because they can entangle you up. But once you get them,
You're there.
you have the same grips and you can hold them for a lot longer because you have the pant grips.
Yeah.
And vice versa. So I think that those are kind of like the main differences um, in those positions.
Yeah. You can work so hard to pass someone's guard no gi, and you can pass, and it's like one hip and an angle, and they're right back to neutral again. That all that work was
Yeah,
gone. And it's
yeah,
really
yeah.
rare that
There's a lot less
happens.
friction.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I love that. So we'll go back into new wave training. The way you guys are training there right now, you're training 7 days a week. And as you know, the mastermind, John Donaher, I'm sure he's given insight. I love what he does too when he trains, he coaches. He just kind of watches the room, at least from what I experience, and just calls things out as he sees it. And it would be
Hmm.
like first and last name, So it would just be like,
Yeah,
excellent job, Craig Jones. Excellent
yeah,
job. Like, nice work. Like it would just call it out. And it's just this very even keel, not emotional, not excitable. But you're training there and you're realizing, hey, I'm in camp for ADCC. I'm training for ADCC now. I'm training in a room with Gordon Ryan, Nick Malgully, and I've got John Donaher cornering. Do you feel that it was it all about leg focus, or was it just let's like work the general game, or was a big part of the game like, hey, let me get my leg game up to date from being a previous gi competitor to someone that's going to be entering guys like Owen O'Flanagan? How comfortable you looked. Like you looked so comfortable, bro, when you were dealing with that. That as watching back in the match, I didn't notice it. In the match, I just watched live ADCC, and I was like, oh, what's gonna happen? I legit thought you were gonna get tapped. To be fair, because I was like, he was just doing it to everyone. But now going back and watch the documentary and watch again, I'm like, you were so comfortable with the leg entanglements, and to go from that in a short time, like I want to know what that process was like for you.
Yeah. I mean, that definitely, it wasn't the sole focus of the ADCC camp, but it was definitely a large part of my focus in my first few months there. And then, once I felt like, okay, I'm getting pretty good in this area after a couple months, then, we're still doing the positional training every single day. So I'm still getting to practice that. And then it was just a matter of like, keeping that skill fresh and refining it. And then when I'd run into a problem, okay, this is a new thing that I'm encountering. And then, a couple weeks later, here's another thing that I'm encountering. And then just going in and like filling in those gaps. But, it took me like it didn't take me that long to really understand the general idea defensively. And then, over time, I just kind of kept refining and filling in the little gaps here and there. And I definitely still focused a lot on that for the ADCC camp. I didn't really focus much on leg offense as much as I would like to. I'm doing more of that now. But for the ADCC camp, I knew it wasn't something that I was going to really have to rely on. So it wasn't something that I focused on offensively. But defensively, I did need to be aware of it, and then something that I've been working on, early on and moving there. So by the time ADCC rolled around, I felt pretty comfortable, like in the room,
Yeah,
going against the best guys in the room, and I felt like really comfortable defensively.
you looked it, bro. That match was so cool because it's like this guy, like, and that style is really hard to deal with. That's like that Eddie Cummings game where it's like it's very hard to deal with someone who's like a Lachlan Giles, who like they're not really trying to show other aspects. They're just like making it very clear. I'm very good at this one aspect of the game, and I'm gonna constantly force my way underneath you. And it's hard to
Yeah.
deal with that, obviously, because from thinking from like an MMA perspective, fighters are like, man, I would just start hitting you. But when you
Yeah.
have to engage that guy,
Yeah.
you're going right into a crocodile's mouth, and it's a pain in the ass when someone's got incredible elevation and they got good control. So to see you just entering and you're just like so comfy, pummeling your legs back in, and then to hit that toe hold, and the face you made when you hit the toe hold, you were just like, it worked. Because I think you even said in a documentary, you're like, I was just going to threaten this to get him to let go, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, I knew that like he would have to either let go and turn his back, and then I would take his back. Otherwise, he was gonna get broken in that position. And so I would really kind of got him stuck was that I was one, he was committed to the leg,
He was all
and
the way back.
two, I was able to post his hamstring with the other leg. So that made, even if he did want to turn, it would have been hard just because of the hamstring post. So it was a legitimate threat. And the second I got my hands locked, I knew that I could do some damage, and that I thought that, okay, I'm gonna threaten it. If it doesn't work, he's gonna have to turn his back. So he's gonna have to try to turn out of it.
Yeah, the way he conceded to the submission too, he kind of was like, "Damn, nice." Like he laughed, you know. Like you see, he was like, "Oh, dude." Like I think he realized, like I left my foot right there, right where you're looking at it. Like your body was turned completely away, right? He had the outside heel or inside.
He was attacking an inside heel hook when I went for it.
Yeah, that was beautifully done. And so to see that and even hear the commentators, they were like, well, he's clearly got a lot better with his leg lock game, you know, training with the likes of Gordon Ryan and Donaher's gym. But it was just awesome to see that side of it where, again, people think like you need to be a specialist. That like, no, man, I can go out and beat a leg lock specialist with a leg lock, right?
The last thing you want to do is try to avoid a leg entanglement on somebody who's, really pursuing that. So at some point he's going to get you into your legs. Like there's just no way around it. Like if a guy wants to only play half guard, like at some point he's going to find a way to grab onto your leg and put you in half guard. So trying to avoid it is the worst thing you can do, in your opinion, because you just end, in my opinion, because you end up just playing a negative game. So you don't get any offense going. You just make it kind of ugly. And at some point, if he's really, really determined, he's going to get to your legs. So I knew that in order for me to get something going, I needed to get, I kind of accepted the leg entanglement, just played from there. Initially, I started playing angles and just seeing what he was going to do. And then eventually he was able to get in. So I just accepted it and played from there.
Yeah, it was beautifully done, man.
Yeah.
It was awesome to see. And it's like, that the way documentary puts it in, they do such a good job cutting up the footage and showing you different angles of it. I own a video production company. That's my business. I own a video media company here. So looking at this side, I'm like, man, Flo does a great job with the storytelling, but not only do they have so much footage to show.
Yeah.
So well done to those guys and for you for the submission. And then
their production was awesome.
Dude, incredible. And they had cameras on jibs, right? Flying cameras.
Yeah, they had a ton of stuff. I mean, there were so many. I don't know how many of those cameras were Flo's, but I'm pretty sure like they had a ton of cameras there.
Those cameras that they use
I've never seen
are about $50,000 a piece as well.
Yeah.
That type of camera, not like the regular camera, but like those big ones are about 50 grand a piece. When I saw those, like, man, the production, even the viewing experience was the best Flo's ever done. Sometimes, the Jits King tournament that I was a part of, Flo was our broadcasting channel as well. And at that time it sucked. It was a lot of freeze up or stream, but they've really come up a lot with it. So props to them. So 2 more matches I want to ask you about. What was, for people who haven't seen the documentary, what was the controversy with Denise, the out of bounds? Like, walk through that position. What was going through your mind during that? Because I see the documentary, but a lot of people maybe haven't yet.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there was any controversy. He was just complaining to the referee for a second well, so what happened was he was complaining that when we stopped, that my hands weren't locked. But they show it in the documentary. Actually, I locked my hands and then the referee's call stop. And so the one thing that's very important to note about ADCC is that you must keep fighting, even if you're out of bounds. So even if you're 2 mats over, if the referee doesn't call it, you have to keep going. So there's no out of bounds. It's only when I mean, there's a boundary, and you're trying to keep it within that boundary. But technically, there is no boundary. You can go all the way out into the stands and keep going. I mean, you see in trials, you see guys going into the cameras and the tables all the time, and they're still rolling. Because if there's
And that
action,
differentiates from IBJJF.
yeah, where
And
guys
a lot of guys
intentionally
are,
play the boundary
yeah.
to not to avoid scores. So ADCC, you know, there's no boundary, so you can go out of bounds. And so that's something that I had to be aware of was you know, in training, was like, okay, when I'm training, obviously you're not taking people out of bounds in the training room, but you just had to think about like, okay, if this was ADCC, you know, you have to keep going. So I just kept going until the referee said stop, and I was able to get a body lock, and I just didn't let go of it. I kept it. They put us back in the center. The ref didn't say anything, you know, and the refs for ADCC, I have to say, are really spot on for the most part. Like, they don't make a lot of mistakes because they have also the table judges. So it's not just the guy in the center, but they have the table judges that are the ones really calling the points and calling the shots, and then the guy in the middle is just there to control the action. And so I thought the refereeing was really good. Obviously, no event is going to have perfect refereeing, so you're going to have mistakes and things like that. It's normal. They're humans, but yeah, I mean, I thought they handled. I didn't think there was really any controversy. Like, I knew that I had locked my
Yeah,
hand.
it was
So
the way he kind of. I remember watching that live. I watched it live, and it
yeah,
was he almost like yeah. The story was he was going for the back. You stood up. You had your hips high. He fell off, and then you immediately just
yeah,
went double underhook, and it was out of
yeah,
bounds. And then the
yeah,
ref stops you, and so they set you guys back into the center. You already have the most ideal takedown position, in my opinion, you could have.
yeah,
And I get why he was pissed, but at the same time, it's like you did get there before the ref said stop. So I get why you're like, bro, I'm not letting go of this. But when you took him down, he kind of just like instead of going defensive, he kind of just like laid there and was like he
yeah.
kind of like almost like the match is over now. And it's like, dude, you know,
Right.
like this is ADCC, like you're still in this. So it was cool to see. But versus you, what I liked about it is instead of you going, well, fine, I'm just gonna win this by pointing you out because you could tell he was almost like protesting or like I don't know the word they use, but he was like, hey, I'm not going to try my full now because I feel like I've been discredited some way. You submitted
Yeah.
it, so you're like, hey, like I'm not leaving this up to there to be any kind of controversy. Like, yo, it was beautiful and it was top
Yeah.
applied, correct?
It was what?
Top applied triangle armbar. You went for the
Yeah,
top.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was yeah. I started at the top. I was initially trying to take his back, and then he turtled. So I threw in the arm bar, and then I switched to a triangle.
Yeah, it was sick, and that was the part that I was like, way to kill like that. Then there was really no controversy because the end of it, it wasn't like, hey, I lost because of 2 points because of the out of bound takedown. It was like, hey, man, like you didn't defend the submission. That's what I liked. You like sealed it,
Yeah,
where there was no way for anyone to say anything. It's like, hey, tap is a tap. So that was super
yeah,
well played out. And then we roll
yeah.
into that. Then I think next it was a fighting game, but then we roll into Barbosa, which for the documentary wise was what the cool story. I had no idea about the previous history with you guys. So that made it that much cooler. So it's like you're going against this dude. This is what I really want to know. This is like the biggest part of this. You're going against a dude that you've beaten, but you lost to at this point how many times?
We had 5 matches, and he beat me 4 times.
Yeah. So when most
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
most scenarios, you're going to look at that like, hey, this might happen again. And I know a lot of us have seen Barbosa compete. His style is very like big explosive takedown. He gets like one big move and he kind of like will like ride things out, that like Otto style of training.
yeah.
So when you're going into the finals and you knew it was Barbosa, and did you just have an entirely different approach in mind of the previous because of the new game that you developed? Or what was going through your head this time?
The time that I competed against him before ADCC, I had good success with certain things. It was a subversive match, so he beat me on a decision, but nothing really happened. The reason why he won was because he got a slam, and that counts as a submission attempt under fight to win rules. So that was how he was technically beating me under the scoring criteria. And it's only a 6-minute match. So it's a very fast match. But I felt that when we were hand fighting, I was getting the better of him. And when we were playing bottom, unless he was in a full body lock, which I didn't, which even if he had the body lock, you know, I was able to avoid any sort of near passes. But unless he was in a full body lock, I was getting the better of the actual exchanges. Like I felt like, okay, I can get things going from this position. So that was, you know, obviously I lost the match. It sucks to lose, but I felt like, okay, there was definitely
Build some
positive things to
confidence.
take out of it. Yeah. And so anytime that I've ever faced him, I actually faced him my first 2 times. It was my first tournament as a black belt. It was Nogi Pans, and we fought twice in the same day. So I lost 2-0 on both of those matches. He got a takedown on me, and then he won off the takedown. And then the third time that I fought him, I beat him. It was in the finals of Nogi Pans, and I beat him on a decision, or I can't remember if it was a decision or like an advantage or something. Really tight match, mostly a wrestling match, and I was able to get moves off on him, but still tight match nonetheless. So every single time, I knew what to basically expect, and I kind of started to figure out like, okay, this is what he does, and I have to learn how to play against this style of opponent. So it was kind of a good opponent for me to have, especially early on, because he helped me kind of level up, because I would have to go back into training and figure out, okay, how am I supposed to train for this type of opponent, for this guy in particular, because I know I'm going to see him more times. And Gordon helped me a lot with game planning for guys like that. Before I was even on his team, just talking to him. And so, you know, it was just something that like eventually over time I competed against him a bunch. I knew where I was having success, and I knew where he was kind of stifling me. And it was really just like, you know, more of a tactical thing and a strategic thing. But from that match, the previous match that I had to him, to ADCC, like I said, I felt like I had success in certain areas, in particular hand fighting. I was definitely getting a lot better at hand fighting, and I felt that I was getting ahead of him in the hand fight. And so that was a large part of my strategy, because it wasn't a 6-minute match. It was a potential 40-minute match. So that for me was perfect, because you can hand fight for 40 minutes, make somebody really tired.
And you feel good with
Obviously,
your cardio, right? Compared to how he's shown cardio in the past. I'm sure you're like, hey, if it comes to a war of attrition, just because of muscle mass, body weight, and the way you guys train, you felt pretty good, I'm assuming, with being able to last cardio.
Yeah, for sure. And pacing and just technicality, like, it's going to help you be more efficient.
Yeah.
When you're in those longer matches. And so I really wanted to spend the first like 7 to 10 minutes just trying to put a hand fighting pace on him, because I knew that he was going to be aggressive in the beginning, and just start wearing him out. And that's kind of like what I felt happened, was that as I was doing a good job hand fighting, and I was hanging on his head, and I was making his I could feel his stance start to soften a little bit. And you can only hold that for so long. At some point, you know, your body starts to kind of give out.
Yeah. So, dude, absolutely incredible. I love that look. And then, as you guys all know how that ended, it ended with with the submission, with the choke from the back. So that was cool to see. And like, I remember watching the previous 2 years ago where Gordon and him had that match, and Gordon was like, man, I really wanted to finish him. So I'm sure that even he was watching that, like, fuck yes, you know, so happy that like you got the submission and won that division. And it was cool to see, man. It was really cool to see, you know, first year ADCC and putting the name on like that, you know, with how many submissions did you have? 3 out of 4?
My division 3 out of 4, and then I submitted Heisem in the absolute, so I had 4 total submissions.
Yeah,
and 5 victories.
That's huge. And I think the way that Danaher put it in perspective, I was talking to one of the fellow black belts on my team about his favorite part of that whole documentary was the quote that that he said about you, was he said, if the opponents don't fear you, they're going to use 100% of their game against you. He's like, but the extent that they fear you, okay, like worried about submissions, they're going to start to overthink the situation. And he's like, what happened was they began to fear Giancarlo after what they saw him do. By the final, it's like, yo, he just submitted the knees, submitted O'Flanagan. And I think Barbosa's like, man, like this kid's not the same kid anymore. You know, and it's awesome to see that, man. So it's really inspirational to see that story. And for all these young and up-and-coming athletes that are seeing this, Giancarlo's 27, ADCC champ. That means there's a hell of a lot more room for him to accomplish more, teach more, and a lot more future for you in jiu-jitsu. One of the most important topics that I want to get into, because I'm 38. So conditioning, recovery, and practices to keep the body from breaking, right, is like something that I think a lot of the new generation is lucky enough to be exposed to. When I first started training, if you, like I said, you go to YouTube, you didn't find shit. You never saw like practices for how to do jiu-jitsu and not break yourself. You just saw like, go train hard and don't be a bitch. That's what training was like. And it's like, now you get guys like Rogan that puts it on the map. It's like, oh, cryotherapy and ice bathing and sauna and stretching and nutrition. So what is it like for you? Like how much does John chime in with those antics and ethics? And how much do you do? Like, for example, the sponsor of this podcast today is going to be Cold Plunge. So they actually shipped me a unit, one of those ice baths that they're I think you guys have Morozco, right?
Gordon has one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. Cold Plunge. I actually need to connect you with the owner of Cold Plunge. That was the reason I wanted to talk to you about that, to connect you with them.
Nice.
I'm sure there's something you guys can do together, some kind of collab, but we're doing that with this podcast. But you know, what type of training antics, nutrition, and rest did you implement, and that led you to ADCC Gold?
So I don't do it as frequently now, just because I don't have as much access to it. But I used to do a lot of when I first moved here, and I don't do it as much now, just because of where I live. Just logistically, it doesn't make sense. But I used to go to a place that had a sauna cold plunge, and I had done sauna and cold plunge, like, ice baths,
Sure.
over the years, infrequently here and there. And every time I did an ice bath, like a real like ice bath, like not just cryotherapy, but like, in the actual ice for like 10 minutes or whatever, I always felt like, really good after, real like mentally sharp. Obviously you're frozen, so you don't feel any of like your injuries. And so I always liked the feeling after. Obviously, it sucks being in it, but
Yeah.
I always like the feeling after. And then saunas too. I would do them infrequently, when I had access to them, gyms or whatever the case was, and I always felt that they were good. And then I started going to a place that had both, and so I started doing the combination. I would do like a few rounds like back and forth, and that was really really good. And I felt that it was a huge benefit for my sleep, where just doing either one or both of those, just helped me sleep really good, because I was just like so relaxed after being in such
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
shitty,
Sure.
like 3 minutes of freezing, or just like 10 or 15 minutes of just like intense heat, that by
Yeah.
the time I got out, I was so relaxed, and like I just fell like right asleep.
Yeah. And
And I
sauna
felt
is
really,
always the best thing to end on if you guys are looking to sleep, because if you go in the sauna, it relaxes your body, but your body's also going to be spending the rest of the next couple hours trying to cool itself back down, which is what you want when you sleep. So like
right.
if you ice bath at night before bed, it will keep your ass awake because you're like really woken up, and now your body's trying to heat yourself back up, which gives you less
Yeah.
restful sleep. So that's
Yeah.
huge. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I always felt that that was really good, for recovery. I didn't know specifically what it was doing, but it always felt good, and I just enjoyed doing it. In terms of food, I don't have any specific diets, but like I think most people know like the stuff that's bad for you. So like sodas, sugary things, like processed foods. So I try to eat like pretty much, I almost eat the same things every day. So I pretty much like have like, I eat eggs, in the morning. I'll have like eggs. I'll have like rice, white rice, and like, chicken or beef or sweet potatoes, or like kind of the same carbs, like white rice and chicken, white rice and beef, things like that. And pretty generic, like normal, like whole foods. And obviously I eat, whatever I want. I would say that like my diet's like 80% like pretty clean and healthy. And
Yeah.
then if I go out, like I'll just, I'll eat whatever I want,
Enjoy your
so
life
it's,
as you should.
yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And for
That's it.
me,
You're eating in the morning though, right? So you're eating before morning training.
sometimes, not always, just depends.
Do you feel a difference when you don't?
It's really just depends on how hungry I am, and whether or not I need to cut weight. So the diet going leading up to ADCC, I had to be a lot more strict, because I had to make a certain weight, and I had to make it, 3 days in a row. And so there I was like counting, every, like weighing every little bit of food,
Damn.
putting it into a calculator, and like things like that. So in that aspect, like it wasn't necessarily the type of food; it was more like the actual like calorie intake, and like doing a proper like weight, a weight cut. Um, But day to day, I pretty much eat everything. I definitely eat a lot of meat and protein and eggs,
Yeah.
and then I keep a pretty like well-rounded diet.
Yeah, and it clearly works. I mean, we're looking for photos on your Instagram to pull off for making the cover photo. And there's that one of you on the beach with like the cowboy hat or like the beach hat,
Yeah,
and it's like
yeah,
shredded, bro. Like 8-pack abs. And so clear, like
yeah,
we had to ask about the food because obviously that could be because you're again training every day, so you're burning a hell of a lot of energy. And I know that makes a difference, but the diet has to be important at a certain point. Like I remember watching the Rogan podcast years ago with Joe Schilling. Remember who he was? He was a
yeah, for
kickboxing
sure.
champion.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
And he was interviewing him, and he was like, Joe Schilling was like, I smoke cigarettes. Rogan's
yeah,
like, you're a kickboxing world champion and you smoke cigarettes? He's like, yeah, dude.
yeah,
And he's like, I mean, that's cool, but like, think about how much better you could have done if you didn't fucking smoke cigarettes.
yeah. It's
And it's
weird though. Like, there's some guys that like
I can do anything.
they just do it, yeah, and it's like it seems to like work for them. Like, you get like John Jones was like super dominant, and like he definitely had like a crazy lifestyle. Mike Tyson. There's certain guys, and you wonder like if they didn't have that, like you think how much better they would have been, but like maybe they wouldn't have been. Like who knows? It's hard to say because I don't really notice any particular difference in my performance based around my diet. Like if
Mm.
I'm eating, I don't know, fucking no dairy or whatever.
Yeah, like
I don't
you
notice that I
try
necessarily,
taking things out and you're
yeah,
like, hey, none of it really seems to make a difference.
I don't really necessarily see that like I'm performing like a noticeably
Sure.
better. Like I'm like, okay, this is like I'm crisp now. Like I'm fucking sharper than I was
Yeah.
before. Like I still feel pretty much in the gym, in the training room, the same. And I also like to train slightly on an empty stomach. So I try not to eat too much during the day
That makes you feel
because
better.
I'm training all the time and I'm just not as hungry when I'm training. And by the time the day ends, I'm starving. I eat a bunch of food and I'm ready to go to sleep. So that's kind
Yeah,
of
that
like
makes a
how
ton
I
of
how I
sense.
do it.
I
But
feel like
some people are different. Like some people need like it's really case by case. I think you have like the general, and then you have like these little subsections where like some people are this way, some people are that way, and it just depends. I know some people that like if they eat gluten, like they just swear that it just fucks them up. They can't sleep.
yeah.
Everything
It
destroys
could
them.
be
For
how they
me,
think too, right? Like
right? Yeah,
I think that's the reason I want to ask that because I think there of course it helps for the young generation and new generation to have this knowledge that are trying to be jiu-jitsu competitors. But at the same time, you can take it to the far extreme where they're too focused on the small details instead of just training and getting good instruction. And so
yeah.
it's like, yo, like your one diet you did or like the one ice bath you do every day is not going to make you a world champion. It's going to be just fucking training and getting,
It's a supplement, right? Yeah,
yeah,
like it's like it's an extra thing. And like people ask me this all the time about lifting, like what's your lifting like? And I'm like,
yeah.
man, I used to do a bunch of programs. I used to do a lot of like, different styles and like I had coaches and this and that. And that gave me a good foundation. But nowadays I just kind of do whatever I want to like
But is it
maintain.
bodybuilder style?
I kind of do a combination of things. Like sometimes I'll do higher reps, sometimes I'll do, the other day I just like felt like doing a 1 rep max, so I did it. It's just kind of like how I feel and how I do it. And the most important thing is the mat time. Everything else is going to make a minor like. There's world champions that don't do strength and conditioning. There's world champions that eat McDonald's. There's world champions that
Yeah, that
fucking
was Marcelo Garcia. That was both of them for
right.
him. I think his diet was notoriously bad, and he didn't do anything but train jiu-jitsu. And
But they all have one thing in common is that they have to fucking train jiu-jitsu. And
yeah,
so like you
dude,
have to do that thing.
yeah, I think I forget which coach said it. It might have been Dean Lister or John Donahue. One of them said it on a podcast. But like, hey, if you want to get better cardio for jiu-jitsu, it's really easy. Just do jiu-jitsu more. Like, just do more
Yeah.
jiu-jitsu, and your cardio will get better for grappling. It's like you can't run and get better cardio for grappling. It's because the
No.
guy's not on top of you putting pressure on your lungs, so it's not going to be the same. You got to get better at making space, take a breath, and that's
Yeah.
something that's so huge. And the last part of the recovery part, stretching. How much of that do you actually do, and is part of your game?
I don't stretch at all these days. I used to do a lot of stretching when I was younger because I'm inherently inflexible. But it's another thing too is like I used to be really, really tight. And then my first ever coach used to stretch a lot. He was actually known for being flexible. Like he could like do like almost a full split and he would stretch all the time. Like he would watch class and he'd be stretching. And so like he really got me into stretching a lot when I first started, and to the point that I could like open my legs pretty far and things like that. And then I'm just like at a comfortable level of flexibility that I don't really work on it much at
Yeah.
all.
And you maintain
And
it through training.
yeah, exactly. I maintain it through training. Like I know, like I'm in positions all the time that like I don't need like I don't feel like I need extra flexibility to
Right.
like pummel like legs and things like that. So I feel good, and so
Really.
I don't really stretch much at all. Much at all.
But one of the things that Jitsu has, like, of course, it can have this nature because everyone has their own game, their own body type, their own styles. A lot of times you'll see someone that will train in an academy and they'll get in there and they will be too stiff to do certain techniques. Like their
Yeah,
guard game, their hips are killing their potential to throw triangles from guard. And they'll just go, ah, I'll just won't do that one. And it's like,
yeah,
I think the best way I heard Rogan say it one time, he's like, you'll never go to a kickboxing gym and have a guy say, hey, I'm just not going to do head kicks because I'm not flexible enough. It's like, no, you just decide you
right,
got to stretch. So it's like, I
yeah,
think it's so true. Like once you achieve a certain level of flexibility, I think Gordon's an example. When Gordon was skinnier, he looked super flexible when you have those
yeah,
matches. And now he looks a lot tighter, but I don't see any techniques that he tries that he can't get his legs in place or he can't
yeah,
move his body.
exactly.
So it's like
Yeah,
flexible. You know through training, hey, I have enough flexibility to play my whole game, right? And of course,
yeah,
stretching is injury preventative, but like, I really want to get that. So it sounds like you've got like a general approach to nutrition,
yeah,
training, and most of your focus goes on to training, correct?
yeah. And also like stretching. Like if I stretch my hamstring and I can like put my head all the way down on my leg, um it's not necessarily like my muscles getting maybe more flexible, but it's not gonna necessarily uh uh cross over to
Doing more.
flexibility where you have to like, yeah, you have to, it's more
Sure.
about like the
Like it
technique at
doesn't
that
open
point.
up new attacks for you, I guess what you're saying,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, exactly,
I
exactly.
think that's a good way to put it, man. So right now, like you're teaching instructionals, which is huge, amazing time to do this. And I think I'm actually going to pick up the chest to back that you just dropped. I saw that on your Instagram. So
Yeah.
what do you have going on in the realm of that right now? Like how do you instruct? Is it similar style to how you were helping John with his?
No, so I'm teaching. So I have 3 instructionals out right now. And so there's 2 chest to back videos. It's a series. And I have 1 leg lock defense video because a lot of people were asking me about that.
Oh, that's perfect.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I'll have a series coming out after leg lock defense. I'm working on leg lock counters. And then after chest to back, now I'm working on chest to chest. So they're going to kind of tie into each other in that aspect conceptually. So yeah, John just told me that it's important to have like a general theme and kind of like stick to a theme. So you can see that the way that he teaches, there's everything's very like
Yeah.
about one specific position, and it all kind of ties into one or like kind of overlying theme and overlying concept.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I definitely think I'll be picking that up for sure and checking that out. And where can everyone else find that?
So you can find that on BJ Fanatics. I do all my instructionals with them, and so like they're pretty much the biggest platform for
Yeah.
BJJ
Over.
instructionals. Have them all on there. So I have like a link on my Instagram where you can check it out.
They just came in and passed Budo Videos guard is what they did. I feel like Budo Videos was the spot. You remember for a while.
Yeah, they were for a while, and then they kind of like disappeared. I haven't seen them in a long time.
No, I just thought of it just now when you said the biggest platform. I'm like, wait,
Yeah,
there was another one, Budo Videos, but like that's over. No, BJ Fanatics. It's so cool. I was just speaking about that because I'm in a mastermind group here, and it's like since leaving Jiu-Jitsu and going into business, I've had some good success in business, and it's so cool. I always talk about how Jiu-Jitsu does really prepare you for the business world so much. Because if you've achieved something where you're like, yo, like I'm just getting a black belt, like 2% of people that train get to that level. So you're like, hey, like when the going gets tough and shit gets stressful, so many people just quit anyways. And so
yeah.
you already have this. So when I think about what it was Bernardo, what was his partner's name that did that? BJ
Michael Zinga.
Michael, like that's a brilliant
Yeah,
idea. And look where they've
yeah,
taken that to now, and not only it's not just for them to profit, but they're giving all these athletes opportunity to profit and profit share. So
yeah,
like it's a very synergistic, like good energy business that's helping the community, the
yeah,
athletes, and their bank accounts, which is what you want. So it's like honest
yeah.
money. It's really cool what they've done there. I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah, it's amazing.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
it's crazy what they've been able to do, and it's the biggest kind of revenue generator for athletes
athletes, of
that
course.
want to make a living. Yeah,
Totally smart. I mean, it makes total sense. Like you think about online sales and I mean, we sell an online course in my business too, to our clients, which is real estate agents. But the beauty is when we get that, when someone buys a course from us and we get the notification on the phone, you know, that doesn't mean I have to go to work now. That means they got something that I did last year, and now I just got paid. It's like 100% profit besides taxes, and that's like, it's awesome. So it's like that's another cool side of it. So for athletes, especially like you go out and you do something amazing, and it's like you can ride the wave of it and be like, hey guys, let me show you how I did. So
we're in a cool.
It's been really cool being able to talk to you about this, man. I hope everyone can benefit from this a lot. And you know, what's next for you right now?
I have a couple seminars that I'm doing this month, and then I'll still be training, but then after that, I'm going to start kind of ramping up the training and getting ready for upcoming tournaments. I don't have anything set in stone scheduled yet, but I'm trying to compete as soon as possible. So I have a few seminars. I'll be in Mexico next weekend teaching a camp, and then the weekend after that, I'll be in Asheville teaching a seminar.
I love it, man. Well, it's been really insightful. It's a pleasure to do this, guys. Go follow Giancarlo Bondoni and keep training.
Thanks so much.